young girls vanishing near an abandoned asylum, a corpse hanging in a carnival funhouse like a fake dummy, a woman murdered after something crawled through the wall behind her bathroom mirror, bodies rotting under hotel beds while guests slept above them, a man filling his home with dolls made from the dead. These sound like urban legends, but they turned out to be terrifyingly real. Number 14. Cropsey. On Staten Island, Cropsey was the kind of name kids whispered when they wanted to scare each other. He was supposed to be a child-snatching monster hiding near the old Willowbrook grounds, a place already wrapped in fear because of its abandoned buildings, dark woods, and empty tunnels. Some versions said he had escaped from a mental hospital. Others gave him a hook for a hand. Most adults treated it like a warning story to keep children away from dangerous places. Then real children started disappearing. The place at the center of the fear was Willowbrook State School, a huge institution once used for children with disabilities. By the time the legend grew stronger, the grounds had become the perfect setting for a nightmare. There were empty buildings, wooded paths, broken spaces, and enough ruins for the story to feel possible. But the real horror was not a creature from a campfire tale. It was a man named Andre Rand. Rand had once worked at Willowbrook under another name, and years later, he drifted around Staten Island while living near the same grounds people already feared. In 1987, 12-year-old Jennifer Schweiger disappeared. She had Down syndrome, and her disappearance sent searchers into the woods around Willowbrook. Days later, her body was found in a shallow grave near the old grounds, close to where Rand had been staying. Rand was later convicted of kidnapping Jennifer and sentenced to 25 years to life. That was not the only case tied to him. Years later, he was also convicted of the kidnapping of 7-year-old Holly Ann Hughes, who vanished from Staten Island in 1981 after going out to buy a bar of soap. Her body was never found. Number 13. The corpse in the carnival funhouse. Carnival funhouses are built to fool your eyes. Bodies hang from ropes, skeletons grin in the dark, and lifelike figures stand in the corners. Everything is supposed to be fake, even when it looks disturbingly real. That is what made the old rumor so creepy. What if one of those props wasn't a prop at all? In Long Beach, California, that rumor turned out to be true. In 1976, a crew was filming inside the Laugh in the Dark attraction at the Pike Amusement Zone. One of the figures hanging there looked like a dusty old mannequin painted in bright colors. It had been treated like decoration for years. Then a crew member moved it, and one of its arms broke off. Under the fake-looking outside was real bone. The dummy was actually the mummified body of Elmer McCurdy. McCurdy had been a small-time outlaw, not some master criminal. He robbed trains and banks, made mistakes, and died in a shootout in Oklahoma in 1911. Nobody claimed his body, so an undertaker embalmed him and put him on display. People paid coins to see the dead outlaw who would not stay out of trouble, even after death. Then his body began a strange second life. It was passed through sideshows, carnivals, wax displays, and amusement attractions. Each new owner treated it more like an object than a person. Over time, the truth got lost. People forgot the mummy had ever been human. He was painted, damaged, moved around, and displayed as a spooky fake body. By the time he was found in Long Beach, McCurdy had been dead for about 65 years. After investigators identified him, Elmer McCurdy was finally buried in Oklahoma. Concrete was poured over his casket so nobody could dig him up and turn him into a showpiece again. Number 12. The Killer Clown. Clowns are supposed to belong at parties, circuses, and children's shows. But horror turned them into something else. A painted smile can hide a face. A bright costume can make a stranger look harmless. That fear sounds like a movie trick, until a real clown walked up to a Florida home with flowers, balloons, and a gun. On the morning of May 26, 1990, Marlene Warren was at her home in Wellington, Florida. She was 40 years old. Her son and his friends were inside the house eating breakfast when someone pulled into the driveway. At the door stood a person dressed as a clown wearing an orange wig, a red nose, and a painted face. Marlene opened the door. One balloon reportedly said, "You're the greatest." At first, it looked like a strange but harmless surprise. Marlene smiled and said something about how pretty the flowers were. Then the clown pulled out a gun and shot her in the face. The killer calmly walked back to a white car and drove away. Marlene was rushed to the hospital, but she died 2 days later. For years, the case stayed unsolved. Investigators looked closely at Sheila Keene, a woman who had worked for Marlene's husband, Michael Warren. Police believed Sheila and Michael had been having an affair, though they denied it. Years later, Sheila married Michael, and the case grew even darker. The break came after old evidence was tested again. Investigators said new testing helped connect Sheila Keene Warren to the crime. They also pointed to costume shop records, fibers, and the getaway car. In 2017, she was arrested. In 2023, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder while still claiming she was innocent. Number 11. The Creepy Doll Collector. Creepy dolls are one of those fears that never really goes away. A doll can sit still for years and still look like it is watching. Horror stories love the idea of a lonely person living with dolls that look too real, dressed too carefully, and placed around the room like they are waiting to move. In Russia, one man turned that nightmare into reality. Anatoly Moskvin lived in Nizhny Novgorod. To many people, he was not some obvious street criminal. He was a historian, a cemetery researcher, and a man known for studying old burial sites. He spoke several languages, wrote about cemeteries, and knew the names and locations of the dead better than most people knew their own neighborhoods. That made what the police found even more disturbing. In 2011, officers investigating grave robberies searched his home and garage. Inside, they found rooms crowded with books, papers, clothing, and life-sized figures. At first glance, they looked like handmade dolls. They were dressed in stockings, dresses, coats, and children's clothes. Some had faces covered with fabric. Some were posed around the room like members of a strange family. Then police realized the dolls were made from stolen human remains. The bodies had been taken from cemeteries. Many were the remains of young girls. There were more than 24 of them. Investigators also found cemetery maps, grave markers, and records that suggested he had visited far more burial sites than the bodies found inside. Number 10. The Bathroom Mirror Murder. People have always made mirrors feel dangerous. Bloody Mary, bathroom ghosts, shadowy faces in the glass, something standing behind you when you look up too fast. It all sounds like the kind of fear made for horror movies. But in Chicago, the thing behind the mirror was not a ghost. It was a killer's way in. Ruthie Mae McCoy was 52 years old and lived in the Grace Abbott Homes, a public housing building in Chicago. Her apartment was on the 11th floor, high above the street, behind a locked door. But the real weak spot was not the door. It was the bathroom. The medicine cabinets in some apartments were built back-to-back, with a narrow pipe space behind them. That space was meant for plumbing access, but people in the building had learned something terrifying. If someone removed one medicine cabinet, crawled through the space, and pushed through the other side, they could enter the next apartment through the bathroom wall. On April 22, 1987, Ruthie called 911. She was scared and trying to explain that people were coming through her bathroom. To anyone who did not know the building, that sounded almost impossible. A person coming through the bathroom cabinet sounded like panic, confusion, or something from a nightmare. But Ruthie was telling the truth. Other calls came in that night reporting screams and gunshots from her apartment. Police came to her door, but they did not get inside. The key did not work, and the door stayed shut. The next day, there was still concern because Ruthie had not been seen. Still, she remained inside that apartment. When the door was finally opened, Ruthie Mae McCoy was found dead. She had been shot 4 times. Her bathroom cabinet had been removed, and the opening behind it showed how the attackers got in. Items were missing from the apartment, including a television and a rocking chair. Number 9. The Real-Life House of Horrors. Horror movies love the idea of a house where the furniture is not really furniture. A mask on the wall is not rubber. A chair is not just wood. A bowl is not just a bowl. It sounds too sick to be real, the kind of thing made up to shock people in a dark theater. Then police walked into a farmhouse in Plainfield, Wisconsin. Ed Gein lived alone on a quiet farm. He was known around town as strange, but not as the kind of man people expected to become one of America's most infamous killers. He had been deeply attached to his mother, and after she died, he shut away the rooms she had used and left them almost untouched. The rest of the house slowly became filthy and hidden from the world. In November 1957, a hardware store owner named Bernice Worden disappeared. Her son was a deputy sheriff, and he quickly noticed that Gein had been one of the last people seen at the store. Police went to Gein's farm that night. What they found changed American horror forever. Bernice Worden's body was in a shed. She had been shot, then horribly cut apart after death. Inside the house, investigators found something even more disturbing. Gein had robbed graves and used human remains to make objects, clothing, and masks. There were skull bowls, skin-covered furniture, face masks, body parts kept in boxes, and items made from pieces of women he had dug up from cemeteries. Police also found remains linked to Mary Hogan, a tavern owner who had vanished in 1954. Gein confessed to killing both Hogan and Worden, though he was only convicted for Worden's murder. He was found legally insane and spent the rest of his life in mental hospitals. Number 8. Slender Man stabbing. Slender Man was born online, in a fake horror image posted for fun. The picture showed a tall, thin figure in a dark suit standing near children. He had no face, no clear past, and no real rules. He became the internet's perfect boogeyman. In stories, videos, games, and fan pages, Slender Man watched children from the trees, followed people in silence, and pulled them into a world they could not escape. Everyone was supposed to know he was fictional, but not every child saw it that way. In Waukesha, Wisconsin, in 2014, 3 12-year-old girls were friends. 2 of them, Morgan Geyser and Anissa Ware, became obsessed with Slender Man. They believed he was real. They believed he lived in a mansion somewhere in the woods. They believed that if they killed their friend, they could prove themselves to him and protect their own families from his anger. Their target was Peyton Leutner. She thought she was spending time with friends after a birthday sleepover. On May 31, 2014, Morgan and Anissa led her into a wooded area at Davids Park. Then Peyton was stabbed 19 times. The wounds were serious. The knife missed a major artery by a tiny distance. Peyton was left in the woods, but she did not die. She pulled herself up, crawled toward help, and was found by a passing cyclist. The 2 girls were arrested soon after. They told investigators they had attacked Peyton because of Slender Man. Later, both were found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect and sent to psychiatric care. Number 7. The Boy in the Walls. Every house makes noise. Pipes knock, wood shifts, floors creak at night. Most people hear those sounds and tell themselves it is nothing. But one of the oldest fears is that the noise is not the house at all. It is someone hiding inside it. In Pepperell, Massachusetts, the Bowen family started noticing things that did not feel right. Items went missing. Strange sounds came from inside the home. For a while, the sounds could be brushed off as imagination or animals. Then the truth came out. The person inside the house was Daniel LaPlante, a teenager who had been stalking the family. He had found places to hide inside the home, using narrow spaces behind walls and closets to stay close without being seen. This was not a quick break-in. It was the nightmare version of a house that no longer belonged only to the people living in it. When he was finally discovered, the scene became even more disturbing. He appeared inside the house, dirty and armed, terrifying the family before vanishing again. Police searched, but the way he had used the hidden spaces made him hard to find. But Daniel LaPlante's story did not end with the Bowen family. In 1987, he broke into the Townsend home of Priscilla Gustafson. She was pregnant, her husband was away, and she was home with her 2 children, Abigail and William. Priscilla was shot twice at close range. Abigail, who was almost 8, and William, who was 5, were drowned in separate bathrooms. LaPlante was later convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Number 6. The Poisoned Halloween Candy Killer. Every Halloween comes with the same warning. Do not eat candy until an adult checks it. Look for open wrappers. Watch for strange holes. Be careful with anything that looks wrong. For years, parents feared that a stranger might poison a child's candy. Most of those stories were rumors. Then one father made the nightmare real. On Halloween night in 1974, Ronald Clark O'Brien took his children trick-or-treating in Deer Park, Texas, near Houston. His 8-year-old son, Timothy, and his 5-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, were with him. A neighbor and other children were there too. The night was rainy, so the group only visited a small number of homes. O'Brien later claimed he got several giant pixie sticks from a house where no one came to the door. That story was already strange. Nobody had actually seen anyone hand him the candy. Still, he gave the pixie sticks to Timothy, Elizabeth, and 3 other children. The candy had been opened, filled with potassium cyanide, and stapled shut. Timothy ate his before bed and complained that it tasted bitter. O'Brien gave him a Kool-Aid to wash it down. Minutes later, Timothy was vomiting and convulsing. He died before doctors could save him. The other children survived only because they did not eat the candy. One boy even went to sleep holding his pixie sticks because he could not get the stapled wrapper open. O'Brien had been willing to risk more children just to make the poison look random. At first, he tried to make it look like a stranger had used Halloween to kill. Parents in the area panicked and turned in candy to the police. But the story started falling apart. None of the homes on the route had given out pixie sticks. O'Brien had money problems, and he had taken out life insurance policies on his children shortly before Timothy died. O'Brien was convicted of capital murder and later executed by lethal injection in 1984. Number 5. Dead body under the hotel bed. The story usually starts the same way. A couple checks into a hotel room, drops their bags, and notices a terrible smell. They call the front desk. Someone sprays air freshener, changes the sheets, or says the room was cleaned already. So the guests stay. They sleep in the bed. The smell gets worse. Then someone finally lifts the mattress, checks the bed frame, and finds a dead body hidden underneath. It sounds like the kind of story people tell to make you afraid of cheap motels. But this one has happened in real life more than once, in places where ordinary guests thought they were only renting a room for the night. Hotel rooms feel clean because they are supposed to be reset for every guest. But most cleaners are not pulling apart the heavy base of every bed after every checkout. In 1994, the body of 24-year-old Josefina Martinez was found under a bed at the Travelers Hotel near Miami International Airport. Guests had slept in that room before the body was discovered. The smell had been noticed, but it did not lead anyone straight to the hiding place fast enough. Other cases followed the same awful pattern. A bad odor is blamed on plumbing, garbage, old carpet, or something dead in the walls. Staff try to cover it. Guests complain. The room still gets used. Then someone finally searches the one place nobody wanted to touch. Number 4. The Babysitter and the Intruder. The babysitter story is one of the scariest warnings ever passed around. A teenage girl is alone in a house at night. The child is asleep. The phone keeps ringing. A stranger tells her to check upstairs. Police trace the call, only to discover the caller is already inside the house. A real babysitter murder made that old fear feel terrifyingly real. In Columbia, Missouri in 1950, Jeanette Chrisman was just 13 years old, only days away from her 14th birthday. On March 18th, she agreed to babysit 3-year-old Gregory Romack while his parents went out for the evening. It should have been a quiet Saturday night in an ordinary home. Instead, sometime before the parents returned, Jeanette made a desperate call for help. The operator heard a girl screaming and struggling, but the call was too broken and frantic for police to get the address in time. When the Romacks came home around 1:30 in the morning, the porch light was on, the front door was unlocked, and Jeanette was dead inside the house. The little boy she had been watching was still safe. He had slept through the attack. The scene raised questions that made the case even creepier. A window had been broken, but investigators believed it may have been staged to look like a break-in. Nothing around it clearly showed that someone had forced their way through. That made police wonder if Jeanette had opened the door to someone she knew. A suspect was investigated, but nobody was ever convicted. The case stayed unsolved, and the real horror never got a clean ending. Number 3. The Real Lover's Lane Killer. Parents used to warn teenagers about parking on lonely roads at night. The story changed from town to town, but the fear stayed the same. A couple sits in a car thinking they are alone. Then something moves outside. A face appears near the window. By the time they understand the danger, the person in the dark is already too close. In Texarkana, that warning stopped feeling like a story. In 1946, people there spent about 10 weeks fearing a night attacker they called the Phantom Killer. He struck after dark, mostly on weekends, and his victims were often couples in parked cars or quiet places away from crowds. The first known attack came on February 22nd. Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry were parked on a lover's lane when a man approached them. They survived, and their description helped turn the case into a nightmare. The attacker wore a white cloth mask with holes cut for the eyes and mouth. He looked less like a normal criminal and more like something made for a campfire story. Then the killings began. Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore were found dead near Griffin's car in March. In April, Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker were killed after a night out. In May, the violence moved from parked cars to a farmhouse, where Virgil Starks was shot through a window while reading at home. His wife Katie was wounded but survived. By then, Texarkana was terrified. 5 people had been killed and 3 had survived. People locked their doors before sunset. Families armed themselves. Stores sold guns, ammunition, locks, and window shades to frightened residents. Police patrolled streets and back roads, but the phantom kept slipping away. No one was ever officially convicted. Suspects came and went, rumors spread, and the case slowly turned into one of America's creepiest crime legends. Number 2. The Denver Spider-Man. Every old house has sounds people try to explain away. A floorboard pops, something scratches above the ceiling. Food seems to disappear faster than it should. Most people blame rats, loose pipes, or the wind. But the fear underneath is much worse. What if the house is not empty when everyone thinks it is? In Denver, Colorado, that fear had a name. Philip Peters was a 73-year-old retired railroad worker living on West Moncrief Place with his wife, Helen. In 1941, Helen was recovering in a hospital after breaking her hip, so Philip was alone in the house they had lived in for years. He had no reason to think someone else was sharing the space with him. But Theodore Coneys already was. Coneys was a drifter who had known Peters through local music circles. He broke into the house while Peters was away, looking for food and money. Inside a closet, he found a small trap door that led to a narrow attic space. Instead of leaving, he stayed. For about 5 weeks, he hid above the rooms, slipping out when he thought Peters was gone or asleep. Then Philip caught him near the refrigerator. On October 17, 1941, the hidden man and the old homeowner came face to face. Peters tried to defend himself, but Coneys attacked him and beat him to death. Then, instead of running far away, Coney's disappeared back into the same hidden space. After the murder, the house seemed haunted. Food went missing. Strange smells spread. People heard noises inside a building that was supposed to be empty. Police searched, but nothing made sense. There was no obvious break-in, and the killer seemed to have vanished. Months later, officers watching the house saw movement. They rushed in, searched again, and finally noticed the attic opening. Coney's was found hiding in the tight space above the house. Number 1. The Bunny Man. The Bunny Man legend sounds too strange to be real. In Northern Virginia, people told stories about a man in a rabbit costume haunting a dark bridge, carrying an axe, and attacking anyone who came too close. Some versions turned him into an escaped killer. Others added hanging bodies, dead children, and Halloween curses. The wildest parts were made up, but the story did not come from nothing. It started with real police reports. In October 1970, a young couple was parked near Guinea Road in Fairfax County, Virginia. One of them was Robert Bennett, an Air Force Academy cadet. The night was quiet until someone came out of the darkness near the car. The figure was described as wearing a white suit with long bunny ears. Then he started shouting that they were on private property and that he had their tag number. Before they could make sense of it, the man threw a hatchet through the car window. The couple escaped without injury, but the hatchet was left inside the vehicle. Then it happened again. About 10 days later, a construction security guard named Paul Phillips saw a man at an unfinished house in the same general area. This time, the man was wearing a gray, black, and white bunny costume. He was chopping at a porch post with an axe. When Phillips confronted him, the costumed man warned him to stay away, then ran off into the woods. After that, the story grew teeth. People started calling in sightings. The legend moved toward Colchester Overpass, now known by many as Bunnyman Bridge. The real incidents became buried under bigger stories about murders, ghosts, and bodies hanging from the bridge. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.